You know those moments when someone you thought you could trust suddenly puts you on the spot in front of people who matter to your career, demanding you prove your loyalty in a way that feels less like family and more like a trap. That is exactly how my world started to crack open. Hi, everyone. I am sitting here in my quiet home office overlooking the mountains, and if you have ever been the one who kept things running smoothly while everyone else took what they wanted, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Hit like if you have ever had to smile through a situation that left you questioning everything you thought you knew about family. My name is Claire Madison Reed. I am 31 years old. It happened on a crisp Tuesday morning in the foothills outside Boulder, Colorado. I worked as a forensic financial analyst at a small but respected firm that specialized in auditing high-end property investment portfolios. Our clients owned many of the prestigious hillside villas scattered across the Mountain View community where my family had lived for years. The setting was peaceful on the surface, with sweeping views of the Rockies that made the whole area feel exclusive and removed from ordinary problems. I was in my office reviewing a stack of ledgers when the door opened without a knock. My older sister, Vanessa Page Reed, walked in, still wearing the tailored coat she favored for meetings with developers. She had always been the bold one in our family, the one who made decisions quickly and expected everyone else to fall in line. At 35, she had carved out a prominent role in the family's luxury property investment firm, the one my father, Gregory Paul Reed, had built, and my mother, Patricia Lynn Reed, had helped shape into something that looked successful from the outside. My older sister did not bother with small talk. She closed the door behind her and set a small rectangular box on my desk with a soft thud. "Claire, we have a problem with the firm's accounts," she said, her voice level but carrying that familiar edge of expectation. "There is a transfer that needs approval today. It is for operational expenses, nothing more. I need you to sign off on it right now." My colleague Ethan James Caldwell was sitting across from me going over the same set of documents we had been discussing. He glanced at the box, then at me, but stayed quiet. I picked up the box. It was an Ancestry DNA testing kit. The packaging was unopened, but the label had my name already printed on it in neat handwriting. My older sister leaned against the edge of my desk, arms crossed. "This is the loyalty test, Claire. The family has carried questions for years about whether you truly belong in the picture we built. Sign the transfer first, prove you are with us, or we can do this the hard way and find out once and for all if you are just another loose end." I set the kit down slowly. The room felt smaller. Ethan shifted in his chair but did not interrupt. I kept my expression neutral, the way I had trained myself to do when numbers did not add up. "My older sister, this transfer is for $280,000. The supporting invoices are vague at best. The payee is a shell entity I have seen in previous audits. Approving this would be signing off on something that looks like concealed account draining. I cannot do that." My older sister smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "You always make everything so complicated. My mother and I have been handling these expenses for years to keep the villas running smoothly. The hillside properties require maintenance, and sometimes the cash flow needs a little flexibility. This is family business, Claire. Not everything fits neatly into your spreadsheets." I did not raise my voice. I simply slid the transfer documents back toward her. "Then you should have no problem providing clear documentation. Until then, my signature stays off it." My older sister's jaw tightened. She picked up the DNA kit and tapped it against her palm. "You know, it is interesting how quickly reputation can shift in a place like Boulder. One whispered conversation at the right community meeting, one mention of family doubts, and suddenly people start looking at you differently. The villas are full of people who value discretion. Think about that before you decide to play auditor instead of sister." She left the kit on my desk and walked out. The door clicked shut behind her. Ethan waited a beat, then spoke quietly. "That looked personal." "You okay?" I nodded once. "It is nothing new, just the usual pressure." But inside the detached part of me that tracked patterns and numbers began to catalog every detail. The timing, the amount the vague payee, the way my older sister had brought the DNA kit as leverage. It felt like more than a simple request. It felt like the start of something deliberate. The rest of the day passed in a blur of client calls and routine audits. I left the DNA kit in my drawer unopened. That evening, I drove back to my own modest villa on the lower slope of the hillside community. The lights from the larger properties higher up glowed against the darkening mountains, including the expansive one where my parents and my older sister still lived. I poured a glass of water and sat at my kitchen island reviewing notes from the day. The transfer request kept circling back in my mind. Something about the shell entity felt familiar from earlier firm records. The next morning, I arrived early at the office. Ethan was already there, coffee in hand. He had pulled some additional files overnight. I took a look after she left, he said. That payee has shown up in 3 other transactions over the last 18 months, always just under the threshold that would trigger internal flags. It adds up to over $1.2 million, routed in ways that do not line up with any property maintenance I can verify. I did not react outwardly. Thank you for checking. I will handle it quietly for now. Over the following week, the pressure built in small, steady ways. My older sister sent texts reminding me of upcoming family obligations at the firm. My mother called twice, her voice pleasant on the surface, but laced with the same expectation I had heard from my older sister. We all have to pull together, Claire. The business supports all of us. You understand that, don't you? I understood more than they realized. I began cross-referencing the transactions on my own time using the secure systems at work. The pattern was clear repeated small drains that funneled into personal accounts tied to my older sister and my mother. Luxury upgrades at the family villa, private travel, even payments that looked like they covered personal credit lines. It was concealed, methodical, and ongoing. Then late one afternoon, I received an anonymous tip. An encrypted email landed in my work inbox from an address I did not recognize. The subject line was blank. Inside was a single line. Check the shared drive folder labeled Legacy Contracts, 2018. Look for the misplaced copy. It is not where it should be. No signature. The sender had used a temporary account. I waited until the office was quiet. Ethan had already left for the day. I logged into the secure internal drive and navigated to the folder. Most of the files were standard incorporation documents and old partnership agreements for the family firm. One file, however, was out of place. It was labeled simply Settlement Agreement, HW, and dated 32 years ago. I opened it. The document was a contract between my mother and a man named Harlan Westbrook, a wealthy Colorado land developer and investor who had passed away several years earlier. The terms were clinical and cold. Harlan had agreed to pay my mother a substantial one-time sum in exchange for her silence about their brief relationship and the child she was carrying at the time. The child was me. In return, my mother had promised never to seek further contact or additional support. The money had been wired directly into an account that later seeded the initial capital for the family investment firm. I sat back in my chair. The numbers matched what I had seen in the earliest incorporation records. The firm my father had always claimed he built from nothing had actually been launched with hush money. My biological father had been Harlan Westbrook, and my mother had used that money to create the life we all lived in now. But the real shock came when I scrolled to the final page. There was a handwritten note stapled to the back dated only 6 months ago. It referenced a recent adjustment to the original arrangement. The note was signed by my mother and my older sister. It outlined how they had been quietly diverting funds from the firm's operational accounts to cover personal expenses, framing it as maintaining the family standard, while I continued to handle the forensic work that kept everything looking legitimate. They had recorded a private conversation confirming the pact, a digital file attached to the note, as proof they both understood the risks. The recording was mentioned, but not included in the scanned document. I closed the file and copied it to an encrypted drive. My hands remained steady. The loyalty test my older sister had demanded was no longer abstract. It was part of a longer pattern of concealed account draining that had been running for years with my mother and my older sister as the architects. That night I sat in my villa listening to the wind move through the pines outside. I did not feel anger or betrayal in the way most people might describe it. I felt a clear, detached certainty. The pieces were falling into place, and I knew exactly what I needed to do next. The following day, I reached out to Nicole Grace Ellison, an estate attorney I had worked with on a previous client matter. She specialized in complex inheritance and trust issues. I scheduled a confidential meeting for the end of the week. In the meantime, I continued my regular work, keeping my expression neutral whenever my older sister or my mother checked in. 2 days later, another anonymous tip arrived. This one was shorter. The recording is in the same folder under Voice Note Pact Confirmation. Listen before you act. I waited until after hours again. The file was there, a short audio recording labeled simply P. I put on headphones and pressed play. My mother's voice came through first calm and matter of fact. Vanessa, the original agreement with Harlan was clear. We used the money to start the firm. Claire has no idea and she never will. The recent transfers are just keeping the villas afloat. She will approve them if you frame it as family loyalty. She always does. My older sister's reply was equally detached. I already gave her the DNA kit as leverage. If she pushes back, we let the community know there have always been questions about her place in the family. Reputation spreads fast up here. She will fall in line. The recording ended with both of them agreeing to continue the adjustments quietly. I saved the file and ejected the drive. The puzzle was complete. The unexpected loyalty test at my office had been the opening move in a larger game they had been playing for decades. But now I held the evidence, and I was no longer the one being tested. The pressure from my older sister did not ease. The following morning, she was back in my office before I had even opened my first file. She closed the door firmly behind her and placed another set of documents on my desk, this time without the DNA kit as a prop. Claire, the transfer still needs to go through today, she said, her voice carrying the same bold expectation I had heard countless times. The firm cannot afford delays on these operational expenses. The villas require consistent cash flow to maintain their value in this community. You know how quickly perceptions shift up here if things start to look unstable. I scanned the new request without touching it. The amount had increased slightly, and the payee remained the same vague shell entity. The documentation is still insufficient, I replied evenly. Approving this would expose the firm to unnecessary scrutiny. I need full details, or I cannot sign. My older sister leaned forward, her fingers tapping the edge of the desk. You are making this harder than it has to be. My mother and I have managed these adjustments for a long time to keep everything running smoothly. If word gets out that you are the one holding things up, people in the hillside villas will start asking questions about your place here. Reputation damage spreads quickly in a place like this. One conversation at the community association meeting, and suddenly everyone remembers the old family stories about how you came into the picture. She left the documents and walked out. I did not follow her. Instead, I turned to Ethan James Caldwell, who had been quietly observing from his side of the shared workspace. She is escalating, he said under his breath. I pulled a few more records last night. The pattern goes back further than we thought. Over $1.2 million in the last 3 years alone, always framed as villa maintenance, but landing in personal accounts tied to your mother and your older sister. I nodded once, keeping my voice low. Keep it between us for now. I am handling the next steps carefully. Later that afternoon, my mother called. Her tone was pleasant at first, the way it always was when she wanted something. Claire, your older sister, mentioned the transfer issue. We are all in this together. The family firm supports the lifestyle we have built in these villas. It would be unfortunate if your hesitation caused any unnecessary talk around the community. People value stability here. You understand that, don't you? I understand the numbers, I answered calmly. The transfers do not add up. I will not approve them without proper documentation. She sighed, the sound carrying a familiar mixture of disappointment and warning. Just think about how this looks. We have always tried to keep things quiet for your sake. The call ended, but the subtle campaign had begun. By the end of the week, I noticed small changes in how some of the local professionals treated me. At a routine client meeting in one of the upscale hillside villas, the property manager, Lydia Moreau, who had always been cordial, seemed distracted and avoided eye contact when my older sister's name came up in conversation. Things have been a bit tense at the firm lately, she mentioned lightly, but her words carried weight. Word travels fast in these circles. I remained detached, focusing instead on the scheduled meeting with Nicole Grace Ellison. She had agreed to see me at her office in downtown Boulder on Friday afternoon. Nicole specialized in estate and trust matters, and I had worked with her once before on a complex audit. I brought only the encrypted drive and a printed summary of the financial discrepancies I had uncovered. No emotion, no accusations, just facts. Nicole listened without interrupting as I laid out the timeline, the original settlement agreement with Harlan Westbrook, the way the hush money had seeded the family firm, and the ongoing concealed account draining that my mother and my older sister had continued long after Harlan's passing. When I played the short recording of their private conversation confirming the pact, her expression remained professional, but her eyes sharpened. This changes everything she said after the audio ended. The settlement agreement itself is legally binding, but the recent diversions from the firm accounts constitute clear financial misconduct. Harlan Westbrook left behind a substantial estate that was never fully disclosed to your family. He had structured a contingent trust that activates upon verified biological connection. The DNA kit your older sister pushed on you actually triggered the first alert in the system months ago when the results were processed through public databases. I received notice yesterday. She slid a thick folder across the desk. The trust holds significant assets, including commercial liens on several of the hillside villas and a portion of the firm's underlying debt. You are the sole beneficiary. This gives you leverage over the concealed draining and the way your mother and your older sister have been managing the books. I review the documents methodically. The numbers were substantial, far beyond what the firm's public records showed. Harlan Westbrook's estate had quietly held security interests in the family business for decades, a safeguard he had put in place without my mother's full knowledge. My older sister and my mother had been draining accounts while assuming the original pact would protect them forever. Nicole continued in her measured tone. We can initiate a formal financial review of the firm. It would be private at first, but once the process starts, reputation in the community will become a factor. These hillside villas thrive on discretion. Any hint of internal instability tends to spread. I signed the necessary authorization forms without hesitation. Move forward with the review, I told her. Quietly for now. The next several days passed in a careful balance of normal work and hidden preparation. Ethan continued cross-referencing records for me, adding more layers of evidence to the concealed account draining. My older sister sent several more pointed messages, each one hinting at growing community chatter. The association board is asking questions about firm stability, one text read. It would be best if we resolved the transfer issue before any rumors gain traction. My mother stopped by my villa one evening, unannounced, something she rarely did. She stood in the entryway, her posture as composed as ever. Claire, this standoff is unnecessary. Your older sister is only trying to protect what we have built here. If you continue pushing back, it will reflect poorly on all of us. People in the Mountain View community notice when someone steps out of line. I did not invite her inside. The numbers do not support the transfers. The review will clarify everything. She studied me for a long moment, then turned to leave. I hope you know what you are doing. Reputation once lost is very difficult to repair. The anonymous tips had stopped after the recording, but the evidence continued to mount. I spent the weekend reviewing every transaction I could access, building a complete picture of the financial penalties that would follow once the trust's leverage was activated. The pattern was systematic, small repeated drains disguised as villa upkeep, always approved internally by my older sister, with my mother's quiet endorsement. It had sustained their lifestyle in the prestigious hillside properties while I handled the forensic work that kept the firm appearing legitimate. By Monday morning, the atmosphere at the office felt noticeably cooler. Victor Lang, the firm's senior partner and a longtime associate of my father, called me into his office. He was a measured man who rarely involved himself in day-to-day operations, but today his tone was direct. Claire, there have been concerns raised about your handling of certain accounts. Your older sister mentioned some reluctance on the recent transfers. We value your expertise, but the firm needs alignment right now. The Hillside community expects smooth operations. I kept my reply detached. The transfers lack proper support. I have flagged them for review. Victor leaned back in his chair. Be careful how you proceed. These things have a way of affecting everyone's standing. I left his office without further comment. The reputation damage was spreading exactly as my older sister had predicted, but it no longer concerned me. I had the recording, the original contract, and the trust documents. The pieces were nearly in place. That same afternoon, Nicole sent a secure update. The formal financial review had been scheduled for the following week. It would involve a full audit of the firm's accounts with representatives from the Westbrook estate present. My older sister and my mother would be required to attend. I forwarded the confirmation to Ethan and continued my quiet preparations. The night before the review, I sat on the deck of my villa looking out at the darkened mountains. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine. I felt no rush of triumph or anger, only the steady certainty that the truth was about to surface. My older sister had started this with a loyalty test and a DNA kit. Now the final document from the estate would flip the entire story, exposing the concealed pact and the years of draining that had propped up their world in these hillside villas. But as I reviewed my notes one last time, a new encrypted email arrived in my personal inbox. The subject line read simply, "Final Piece." Inside was a scanned copy of an updated amendment to the original settlement agreement dated just last year. It bore fresh signatures from my mother and my older sister acknowledging the ongoing financial adjustments and explicitly agreeing to continue them for the benefit of the family image. The document also contained a clause I had not seen before, one that tied the firm's remaining assets directly to the Westbrook Trust in the event of any verified misconduct. I saved the file and closed my laptop. The review was set to begin in less than 24 hours. My older sister and my mother had no idea what was coming, but the last document had already flipped the power dynamic completely. The morning of the financial review arrived under a pale Colorado sky. I drove the winding roads to Nicole Grace Ellison's office in downtown Boulder, the mountain views rolling past without pulling my attention. Ethan James Caldwell met me in the lobby carrying a slim folder of additional cross-reference records he had prepared overnight. "Everything is ready," he said quietly. "The numbers line up exactly with the recording and the contracts." I nodded once and we took the elevator together. Victor Lang, the firm's senior partner, was already seated in the conference room when we entered, looking uncomfortable but professional. Nicole sat at the head of the long table, her expression composed and precise. My older sister arrived first, bold as always, wearing the tailored coat that signaled she expected to control the room. My mother followed close behind, composed and pleasant on the surface. My father came last, his face neutral, but his posture stiff. They took seats across from us, my older sister placing her briefcase down with a deliberate click. "Let's get this over with," she said, her voice carrying that familiar expectation. "The firm has pressing matters in the hillside villas, and these delays are only creating unnecessary talk in the community." Nicole opened the meeting without preamble. She laid out the initial findings from the trust review, citing the original settlement agreement with Harlan Westbrook and the way the hush money had seeded the family firm. My mother's face remained steady, but my older sister shifted slightly in her chair. Then Nicole slid the misplaced contract copy across the table. My older sister picked it up, scanned the first page, and set it down with a short laugh. "This is ancient history," she said, "irrelevant to current operations. Claire is overreacting as usual." I remained silent, hands folded on the table. Nicole did not respond to the deflection. Instead, she opened her laptop and played the recording. My mother's voice filled the room, first calm and matter-of-fact, confirming the pact and the recent transfers. My older sister's reply followed, outlining how they would use reputation damage in the community to bring me in line. The audio ended. The silence that followed was absolute. My older sister's bold expression faltered for the first time. "That was a private conversation," she said, her voice sharper now, taken out of context. "We were simply discussing family finances to keep the villas stable." My mother leaned forward, her tone still pleasant, but edged with warning. "Claire, you know how these things work. The community expects certain standards. Spreading this would damage everyone's standing, including yours." Nicole spoke evenly. The recording is dated and time-stamped. Combined with the financial discrepancies Ethan has documented, it establishes a clear pattern of concealed account draining spanning years. The Westbrook Trust, as primary lien holder on several of the hillside properties and the firm's underlying debt, is now activating its clauses. She placed the final amendment document in the center of the table. My older sister reached for it, her fingers brushing the signatures at the bottom. The color drained from her face as she read the clause that tied ongoing misconduct directly to full forfeiture of assets. "This cannot be enforced," she said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. "We were protecting the family." My father stared at the papers, then at my mother. "You never mentioned any of this," he said quietly, the words heavy in the room. My mother did not answer him. She looked across the table at me, her eyes searching for the hesitation she had always counted on. She found none. Nicole continued without emotion. "The trust is imposing immediate financial penalties. The liens on the 3 primary hillside villas are being called. The firm's operational accounts are frozen pending full repayment of the diverted funds. Repayment must be made within 30 days or the properties and remaining business interests will transfer to the trust." My older sister stood abruptly, her chair scraping back. "You cannot do this. This is our livelihood. The community will hear about how you turned on your own family, Claire. Reputation damage spreads quickly here. People will remember who caused the instability." I looked at her directly for the first time since the meeting began. The recording already spread the truth. I said, my voice level and detached. "The community will draw its own conclusions." Victor Lang cleared his throat. "The firm will cooperate fully with the trust's audit. Any further internal resistance will only accelerate the process." Ethan remained silent beside me, but his presence was solid support. The meeting ended shortly after. My older sister and my mother gathered their things in silence. My father lingered a moment longer, looking between us, but he said nothing more. They left the conference room without another word. Nicole closed her laptop. "The paperwork will be filed by end of day," she said. "The penalties are now in motion." I drove back through the foothills that afternoon. The hillside villas passed by as they always had, but the weight I had carried for years felt different. Lighter, yet permanent. Within 48 hours, the news began to circulate through the Mountain View community. Lydia Moreau, the property manager I had worked with before, sent a brief professional email confirming that 2 of the villas were now under review for transfer. Word spread quickly among the association board and the local professionals who handled the exclusive properties. Invitations to community events that had once arrived automatically stopped coming. My older sister's bold presence at local meetings drew polite but distant responses. My mother's usual social circle grew noticeably quieter. The irreversible loss settled in over the following weeks. My older sister and my mother retained legal counsel, but the evidence was ironclad. The financial penalties were enforced, the diverted funds were repaid through liquidation of personal assets, and 2 of the hillside villas transferred to the trust. My father quietly stepped back from the firm, citing health reasons that no one questioned too closely. The family ties, already strained, severed completely in the quiet way that happens when truth finally surfaces. There were no dramatic final confrontations, no tearful pleas, just silence. I continued my work at the firm under the new structure Nicole helped establish with the trust. Ethan stayed on as a steady colleague, and Victor ensured a smooth transition. The concealed account draining had ended. The business stabilized under transparent practices, and the remaining hillside properties operated without the hidden drains that had propped up one family's image at the expense of truth. I moved into a slightly larger villa on a quieter slope, one purchased outright through the trust, but the change felt practical rather than triumphant. In the end, I achieved what the evidence allowed: control over the financial reality that had shaped my life and the ability to live without the constant pressure of their expectations. Yet the cost was permanent. The family I had known was gone, replaced by an absence that carried its own quiet weight. I did not mourn it. I simply accepted it as the price of choosing truth over toxic ties. Family earns trust through honesty and respect, not through demands and hidden pacts. When those are absent, the only healthy choice is to step away, even if it means walking alone. I sat on the deck of my new villa one evening, weeks later, the mountains dark against the fading light. The air was crisp and still. I felt no rush of victory, only a lingering, empowered calm. The story was closed, silent, and complete. Thank you for listening to my story.